Welcome
Hello.
to Gold Derby. I'm senior editor Denton Davidson here with Aaron Becker, the Emmy nominated creative director for the main title design of Wednesday on Netflix. Aaron, congratulations. It's your first Emmy nomination. So what was that like to hear?
It was a really nice morning because a lot of good friends who I've been working with for many, many years all started texting me. And that's how I found out. I didn't find out through any official channels. It was actually just friends and colleagues who, some of whom have been nominated in the past themselves. So that was kind of exciting.
Yeah.
Felt good. I mean, we're really pleased with I think the organic way in which the project really came about and culminated, as well as the product itself, which obviously I couldn't be more honored by the nomination, honestly, and the rest of the team feels the same way.
Yeah. And Wednesday was such a huge hit, one of the most successful shows to ever hit Netflix. So you've got Tim Burton backing it, directing 4 episodes, Danny Elfman doing the music. So he's an Oscar nominated, Emmy winning composer. How were you brought into the fold? And what was the first sort of brainstorming session like for you to sort of like how do you begin the process of
Yeah.
like, what we're going to do for a main title design?
Yeah, and I did see that the show garnered quite a few nominations. So to see that play out the way that it did on Netflix was great. But we got brought in early with Tim, Al and Miles, Alfred and Miles, who ran the show and created the show alongside Tim. And then we were sort of developing a look for the Wednesday logo actually with Netflix. We were sort of working with them to create almost a brand identity. And we do a lot of that kind of entertainment branding here at Filmograph. So that was sort of what that was actually the way in which we started. We weren't even speaking to the filmmakers at first, and then they were familiar with our work from some referrals. It just so happened that we were deep into it, the process with Netflix on the Wednesday logo stuff, and almost immediately started storyboarding concepts just to give them a little taste of what we could do because only one or two people, one of the producers, Tommy Harper is his name. He used to be at Bad Robot. We had crossed paths years prior. And so they needed to see a couple concepts to make sure that we were capable of doing this, of course. But yeah, it really happened. It happened with a little bit of research and a little bit of guidance from Tim himself, who came to us with, and I think this is an important part to mention. The end of the title sequence was an idea that Tim had, where we pull out of the moon and the clouds part, and then you see Wednesday's face almost as if she's peering over the landscape, emerging from the clouds and looking right directly over the Wednesday title card. So he had that idea of the camera maybe pulling away from the moon in that way and resolving with the moon inside of the eye and some sort of transformation taking place. But it was up to us to take that a step further and turn it into a 1 minute narrative because from that concept is really strong going from the moon to the eye, but that could probably only fill about 10, maybe 15 seconds max, and we needed to build out the first 45 seconds of the piece.
You sort of started at the end.
Exactly.
Because that is a great way to end it. It's Jenna Ortega's eyes just close up over that Wednesday. It opens with the gates of Nevermore Academy, and then this you've got that silhouette of Wednesday, who's unmistakable even as a shadow, and then this whole sequence just moves smoothly. How did you know what you want to highlight? Because we've got like a typewriter, and then one of my favorite things about it is it sweeps down into the cello just as the cello music starts playing. I thought that was really cool. So
Yeah,
how do you decide which sort of elements about this series you want to highlight?
definitely in tandem with the filmmakers, but also by diving deep into the show. So I have to give Al a lot of credit, Al and Miles a lot of credit, in particular for their attention to detail with the symbols. So you mentioned the cello, you mentioned the silhouette of her at the beginning, the typewriter. There were key things like props, actual production design contributions to the show that were extremely valuable and added that textural element, but I think also had I would say metaphorical significance with our ability to use them in a new abstract way where it didn't look, no part of the sequence needed to look like an actual shot from the show. It needed to feel surreal, and it needed to feel like we were you brought up the continuous camera move. That felt personally really, really important to me. And I'll tell you one of the things that it was directly influenced by, which I actually forgot to mention this on a couple of the other calls, but it was like, if you watch Tim Burton's Batman,
Yeah.
the opening sequence is a beautiful, seemingly continuous camera move where it's wrapping through these hallways and then it comes out. And I'm sure you probably remember this as well as I do. It lifts off the ground, and then you sort of realize that you've been traveling through the logo the whole time.
Yeah.
He's done these kinds of mesmerizing, hypnotic sequences, sometimes based around concentric shapes and spirals, that for me personally, I felt like was really necessary to inject some of that into his television debut, and connect it to like the visual language that I could tell he was trying to bring to the show. And so that's sort of where that continuous camera move idea came from, like looking at some of those. There's a creepiness to the continuousness of it, right? It's not like, there's a lot of title sequences out there that do hard cut, and there's nothing wrong with that. Like we've certainly done that, our fair share of that ourselves. But for some reason, the sort of, I don't know, Brothers Quay quality of some of Tim Burton's like work at almost like thinking of these pieces as puppets and their own little marionettes that are in this like morbid landscape that's actually inside of her mind, is I think a big part of it. And I'll just finish by saying that you called out the Nevermore Academy thing at the beginning again.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why we started on the back of her there was because we end on the front. And so, how you talked about reverse engineering from what Tim had given us in terms of the end part, that's how we got to the back of her head as opposed to the front of her head. So we went all the way back, and the very first thing you see is the back. So it's kind of like you're passing through her mind the entire time and coming out of the eye.
Wow.
That's the idea.
How many iterations of this opening sequence do you come up with before you like decide on one? Because this one is dark, but the show wavers. It's a comedy. I mean, it's up for best comedy series at the Emmys. So it's funny, but it's also dark. The opening sequence is, as you said, much more on the creepier side. Like you wouldn't know going in, oh, I'm about to laugh at this show. So how did you always know like we want to go dark with this opening sequence?
I think so, but the one thing that was interesting is we thought maybe black and white was going to be the only palette that we were going to see, just because of Tim Burton's past preferences. But as it turns out, they wanted these kisses of purple that we see throughout the sequence, which were inspired by, I would almost call it like the ray of light in the sequence. It's a hint that she's not entirely as dark as she portends in a lot of ways. Like her heart is open to the characters, but it takes her time. And so her aversion to color throughout the show, which I love how her roommate splits the room in half. And, like all the colorful stuff is on one side of the room, and the black and white stuff is on Wednesday's side of the room. That was actually really crucial for this piece, because we only have these like little moments where a light leak comes in and kisses the side of the frame, or there's a lens flare that's purple, or, a glint along the blade of the cello, like as the knife cuts across and the music plays. But I'll just finish by saying we knew Danny Elfman's music was gonna like kind of tie everything together a little bit. So it was a little bit of a collaboration in that way, but I wouldn't say that we were totally privy to his process the entire time. That definitely happened later on, after we had all of the pieces in place. And then I think he felt like, maybe even more confidence with his team composing, to what was already there. But that's a Tim. I don't want to speak for that relationship.
But you didn't have the whole main title song at that point.
Nope, we had absolutely nothing.
Because it looks like, I mean, it obviously is at the end, perfectly cut to the music.
They did an incredible job composing, and we really didn't know what was going on. I know Tim's relationship with Danny's really special, and that's something that we definitely tried to respect their process on, and never really we just waited until they were ready to share something. And then a lot of it did fall into place. I mean, the continuousness of it allows for some scoring flexibility too, I think.
You share this nomination with animators, designers, 3D artists. This team of yours, how do you collaborate together, and what sort of process is that for each of you to sort of have your hand in it?
Yeah, thanks for calling them out too, because we have a CG supervisor, Lee Nelson, who really helped me do a lot of the blocking. There's also a guy named James Ramirez who did a ton of animation and design on it. And a lot of the insect entomological stuff is from a guy named Eric Keller, who's just incredible. But yeah, the design was from this guy named Joseph Ahn, who does just really great storyboard design. But we it really is grayscale. Imagine like the grayscale previs that you would see in any visual effects shot that is a work in progress in a movie, which I'm sure you've seen a million times. You're probably brought in at all stages of these processes sometimes to see this stuff, but like that's really what it is. And once they're happy with those little production design symbols, like you mentioned, the typewriter, we work around the continuity and that sort of spiral idea where the camera's always kind of twisting a little bit. Everything's sort of, but our roadmap is there. So, the spiral feeling like a grandfather clock and turning into the stairs, where then Thing is running up the stairs, the hand is running up the stairs. All of these little like Easter eggs became increasingly important throughout the process with Al and Miles. And it's because they wrote this thing that they are so in tune with where the Easter eggs should go. But we proposed, I would say, a really nice skeleton that helped us get the job and that helped the process start. But then once the skeleton is there, where if you think about it as just like one long, I don't know, kaleidoscope or one long thing tunnel that you're passing through, once that skeleton is all there and the camera's kind of twisting it a little bit, and then that gives them the creative license to say, hey, we wrote this really cool part about the dahlia, like the flower that actually had to do with Christina Ricci's character, I believe. And so like, can we get the flower in there? And then the flower, we reverse engineer it from the eye to the moon to the flower opening up and the petals like flying off. So in my personal opinion, if you build something around this circular shape, which I found to be so prevalent in Tim Burton's work, then we are already like doing ourselves a great service by having this spiral-like foundation that's going to make people feel like we're in this like psychedelic synapses of Wednesday's mind.
Very cool.
But yeah,
how did you become a main title designer? I mean, who wakes up and just says, I'm gonna do main title designs? How did you land in this field? Because you have a long history. I mean, people can look at your IMDb page. You've got a lot of work on there. So
not bad, right? Because then you start like wondering how relevant you still are, kind of.
But I mean, how did you get started in that? And my other last question is going to be, aside from anyone that you have to compete with, like if you go back in your mind, like, do you have a favorite main title design? Like, can you think of a show or a movie where you're just like, that is the best main title design I've ever seen?
Yeah, this is, as you know, as well as I do, this is so hard for film and television because of how different their purposes are.
Yeah.
Just to cite a really good friend of mine who did the Dexter titles. I don't know if you've ever seen those.
Love that show.
Oh, I love the show and I love those titles, right? My buddy did the live action ones. But just to cite something that he said that I think is so amazing. Before the streaming boom, one title sequence had to last an entire season and an entire series. They would use the same sequence in future seasons as well before the streaming boom. But now television has taken this turn in the last like 5 or 10 years where they customize the sequences each season, which is interesting, but it certainly wasn't the way that it used to be. And so if I'm talking television, I'd say Dexter is probably one of my favorite ones, but it's because I love live action title sequences. And I even fantasized about doing some live action stuff for this, but it just needed too much customization.
Okay.
But in terms of how I got into it, I'll just quickly tell you, I worked for a guy named Kyle Cooper who did the 7 title sequence for David Fincher in 1995, I believe it was. But I came in years and years later, like a decade later, I came in under his tutelage. And then, 5 or so years later, slowly started building my own thing. But I just got into it because of graphic design. I was a graphic designer. That's it. And I love film. And so the perfect marriage of those two things is actually the reason for our company's name, Filmograph.
Yeah. And here you are, an Emmy nominee. So congratulations, it all worked out. It's been a pleasure chatting with you. Thanks for
thank you.
my Gold Derby. Again, congratulations.
No, Dan, it's an honor. It's an honor to meet you, man. I kind of have known a little bit about you for a while, and then when they sent the thing through, I was like, oh, like let me brush up on my my bio learning as well.
All right. Well, good to chat with you, and good luck at the Emmys this year.
I appreciate it. Thank you, Denton.